بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I hope that dear brothers and sisters benefited the most and took the response to their du'as and their tawassul during these last few nights, especially the nights of Qadr. And may Allah give us a blessing to not leave the month of Ramadan before fulfilling our obligations and before benefiting from the most auspicious blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides His servants in this month. The last part that we discussed in the sermon of Muttaqin was Imam alayhi salam's description of Muttaqin's attitude, Muttaqin's behavior in the time of challenges, difficulties. فَالزَّلَازِلِ وَقُورٌ. They are the ones who are steadfast, who are self-possessed, self-composed in the face of challenges. وَفِي الْمَكَارِهِ صَبُورٌ. In the time of the sufferings, the time of the problems, those divine trials, you find them patient. And وَفِي الرَّخَاءِ شَكُورٌ. And in the time of the ease and the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides blessings to His servant, you find Muttaqin at the time of ease to be grateful, to be shakur. Then Imam continues with mentioning three other attributes which concerns a Muttaqi's just attitude, a Muttaqi's just and moderate behavior. So to pay attention to these three characteristics, we can learn, we can understand the Imam's expectations from a pious person, from Muttaqi, how to behave in these situations that we are going to discuss. Imam alayhi salam says that a Muttaqi is someone who لا يحيف على من يبغض. He does not commit excesses against anyone whom he may hate. لا يحيف على من يبغض ولا يأثم في من يحب. And he does not commit sin for the sake of the ones who love them. يعترف بالحق قبل أن يشهد عليه. And he admits the truth before testimony is brought against him. So in all these cases, if you look, you see that the emphasis is about the just attitude, to be just with someone you hate, to be just against someone you love, and to be just against yourself. Let us elaborate, let us discuss what Imam mentions here, looking at the Islamic tradition, looking at the verses of Quran and the hadiths that we have from Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them. When we are talking about the first attribute, just mentioned, La yahif ala man yubghid, we are talking about a pious person, a muttaqi's hatred. So since the discussion is about muttaqi. So we have to assume that Imam alayhi salam mentions the kind of justified hate. So for sure, it is not about, one doesn't talk about someone who hate, who has a bad attitude, who has a negative perspective against a believer, unjust hatred, unjust grudge against others. For sure, these are out of the picture here. A pious person is not someone who bears such kind of emotions. However, even in the case of justified hatred, for example, hatred against enemies of Allah, hatred against someone who violates people's rights, someone who is a tyranny, someone who practices injustice. Even if that's the case, Imam says, you find muttaqin, you find pious people to maintain the balance. They are not the ones who go out of the boundaries. They maintain the boundaries of divine rule. They follow what they are being instructed. Their emotions doesn't get in the way of their justice. We have in chapter Ma'idah, verse 8, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the similar instruction that you can see, the similar teachings here. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين لله شهداء بالقسط. O believers, maintain justice for the sake of Allah and give testimony towards maintaining justice. ولا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا. And be aware, be mindful. Don't let others' wrong actions to push you to do the same thing, to not maintain justice. Make sure that you are different. Make sure that you maintain moderation, that you maintain justice, even if the one who acted against you didn't do the same. أعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. So the whole emphasis is to make sure that a muttaqi should be able to control, to have power over his emotions, her emotions, and to direct them, to orient them in the way in which he makes sure that it satisfies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You look, for example, we have the famous story that I believe that you heard about, the story of Amir al-Mu'minin Ali alayhi salam in the Battle of Trench, Battle of Khandaq. So in his war with Amr ibn Abdul Wad, so the famous story that when Amr insulted Imam and threw salvia to the face of Imam. Just look at the reaction. What happens normally if that's the case for someone, normal people that we know? So in many cases, when we encounter such a situation that someone disrespect us, someone insult us, and we are at the moment of power, we make sure that one regret that insult. So if, for example, the case, it wasn't Ali alayhi salam there, someone else, and Amr was doing the same. So I believe that that person was making sure to give the hardest and the last the hardest moments of his life when he's taking his life. But you see, Imam alayhi salam, when he encounters a situation, he gets insulted. And as a human being, when you feel that, for example, someone threw salt at your face, you get upset, you get angry. But Imam alayhi salam didn't let that anger to get away in the way of his purpose, which was for the sake of Allah. So he felt that that action could affect his emotions and his decisions. So the historical account says that Imam alayhi salam waited. It says that he stood for a moment and walked a few steps just to make sure that he can control his anger and not to let his anger to make him to do any excessive action. Then he did his duty towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the story just illustrates very beautifully just the point that Imam alayhi salam mentions about muttaqillah yahif ala man yubghid. Amr is the enemy. So killing Amr is justified. It's for the sake of defending faith, for the sake of defending Allah, and they are defending, Muslims are defending themselves. Still, Imam makes sure to not mix anything excessive and beyond what is required according to his duty. And you see, when you look at the Islamic teachings, the idea of maintaining balance, the idea of maintaining justice in such cases are very emphasized. We have in chapter Nisa, verse 148, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that's one of the very important instructions in Islam, to respect others, to maintain reputation of the others, to cover their mistakes, their errors, their flaws, to not try to tarnish someone's reputation. So respecting people, respecting their reputation, and try to cover for their mistakes, that's very important and fundamental ethical teaching in Islam. So the verse of Quran says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like to see someone exposing su'a min al-qawl. So Allah doesn't like to see someone exposing other people's flaws and mistakes by saying to others, by backbiting, by narrating, so on and so forth. But unless in a certain situation, Allah man zulim. However, if it is required to take your right, to defend your right, if it is required for you to raise your voice, to let other people know that your rights are violated, to go to court, to let the judge know what happens to you, the verse of Quran says that's the exception. You are totally justified. However, the verse continues, وَكَانَ اللَّهُ سَمِيعًا عَلِيمًا. However, don't take advantage of this exception. I know what you are doing. So, unless it is required for the sake of taking your right, for the sake of defending your right, for the sake of fighting injustice, we are not allowed to expose people's mistakes, expose their flaws, so just to be as covering as we expect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cover for us. But here, what is interesting is that you look in there is a narration from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Hisham ibn Salim, he narrates, he says that قال سمعت أبو عبد الله عليه السلام. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam give us a very important advice to pay attention. Imam alayhi salam says يقول Imam alayhi salam says إن العبد لا يكون مظلوما فما يزال يدعو حتى يكون ظالما. He says it happens the case that someone is subject to injustice. His or her rights are violated. However, he start cursing, he start telling people, he start backbiting, he start narrating, and he goes so much that he excesses boundaries, that the position of the one who was subject to injustice and the one who practiced injustice actually gets switched. So in the day of judgment, he is the one who owes the other person. Because if, for example, the other person practiced injustice against you, hurt you 10 degrees, you go around and without justification, in cases that are not necessary, you hurt his reputation and you hurt him 20 degrees. So you go beyond what was your right. Then it's actually a situation changed. So it says actually the point here is, the message here is to be careful. And Imam al-Islam says a muttaqi is someone that when he is upset, when he gets angry, when he gets mad, he doesn't let his emotions to push him beyond practicing justice, to take any excessive method. This narration, I believe that I mentioned it before in another session, but it fits here perfectly as well. So it is from Samma'a, and he narrates from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam that Samma'a narrates that he had a quarrel, a debate. There was a debate between him and between the one who was taking care of his camels, his Jamal. And so the debate becomes hot, and Samma'a becomes angry and starts insulting the guy who Samma'a believed that he violated his rights. Then the next time that he comes to visit Imam alayhi salam, the narration says, فَقَالَ لِي مُبْتَدَأً. The moment that Samma'a entered, right away, he heard Imam asking him, يا سماعة ما هذا الذي كان بينك بين جمالك. What was that incident which happened between you and the one that was taking care of your camels? إياك أن تكون فحاشا أو سخابا أو لعانا. Be aware, don't be among the ones who are insulting others, who are cursing others. Don't be such a person. I remind you, I warn you, don't be in such a way. Someone says, I said, فقلت والله لقد كان ذلك إنه ظلمني. Says, someone said, by Allah, you are right, you are correct. It happened. But the guy violated my rights. And I was angry, I was upset, I was defending my rights. And that's the point that I want to emphasize. Muhammad says, إن كان ظلمك فقد أبيت عليه. Even if it was the case that you were subject to injustice. He took your right. You violated your right. However, by insulting him, by using those words, right now you are the one who practiced injustice against him. You took the matter to excession. You went beyond what was the moderation and balance in this situation. And then Imam says, that's not what I do. That's not what my believers do, my Shias do. So be careful in such situations. So this is, again, another example to explain what Imam mentions here as one of the attributes of muttaqin. So muttaqin are the ones that, in case that, so it doesn't say that a muttaqi doesn't get upset. A muttaqi doesn't get angry or mad. Sometimes we have to get angry. We have to get upset, especially when there's something, for example, you see an obligation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is violated. You see that someone is someone's right is being taken away, so on and so forth. There are many cases you see when our imams are getting upset sometimes. However, the point is how we react. Imam says, make sure that when you react, you maintain the moderation. You don't go to excession. The next point Imam Islam mentions is that وَلَا يَعْثَمُ فِي مَنْ يُحِبُّ. So it is a similar characteristic. So again, it's about moderation. However, not moderation against the one that we hate, rather moderation against the ones that we hope, that we love, that we like. In other words, Imam Islam says that a muttaqi is someone who doesn't let his love for someone to push him committing something against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's orders, to violate one's obligation. There are many narrations, there are the verses of Quran that encourage believers to love and to show their love, their affection to their parents, to their wives, to their children, to their families, and showing and having a good manner, husnul khulq, is being counted as one of the fundamental characteristics and one fundamental attributes of believers, of those true Shias. If that's the right character. So what Imam means here, again, it's about to not let that love to surpass our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not even let it to get close to that boundary. We have in the verse of Quran, chapter Tawbah, verse 24, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, قل إن كان آباؤكم وأبناؤكم وإخوانكم وأزواجكم وعشيرتكم وأموال اقترفتموها وتجارة تخشون كسادها ومساكن ترضونها أحب إليكم من الله ورسوله وجهاد في سبيله فتربصوا حتى يأتي الله بأمره والله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين. We see the concept manifested in the verse of Quran very beautifully. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet, tell to my servants, tell to the believers, if your fathers, your sons, your brothers, your wives, your sisters, your tribe, and the ones that you acquired, the merchandise for which that you fear that will be no safe, and dwelling that you desire, if these things are dearer to you than Allah and His Messenger and striving in His ways, then wait till Allah bring His command. So clearly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if that's what you want to do, if you prefer others over me, then just wait for my judgment, for my final judgment. And for sure that would not be a judgment in your favor. Just wait for the day that you see that the ones that you love beyond me would not help you anymore. يوم يفر المرء من أخيه وأمه وأبيه. It is the day that one runs away from his dear ones. So the dear ones that come in your way, that they become an obstacle in your way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that would distract one from the right path. One would go astray. So again, it's not about not loving our dear ones. As I mentioned, just look at Quran, all the verses about loving parents, loving children, loving family, all the verses about contributing to your family and the responsibility about family. However, the point is that to make moderation, to be moderate, to have balance, and to realize that everything comes after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, the story of Amir al-Mu'minin Ali alayhi salam that you heard about his reaction, his treatment of Aqil, his brother. When Aqil came to him asking an unjustified request, Aqil came to his brother Ali and he asked for a bigger share of the public treasury. So everyone has a share, equal share. And Aqil thought because he is the brother of the ruler, so he may get a bigger share. He came to Ali and complaining and asked for a bigger share. And the story says that instead of giving him extra share from the public treasury, he taught Aqil a lesson. Because Aqil was blind, Imam brought a piece of melted hot iron close to his hand. The moment that Aqil felt the heat, he took away his hand immediately and he complained to Imam, "Are you intending to burn me? What are you doing?" And then Imam said, that's just a very maybe tribal and very little heat that you experience, and you are so objecting and you are complaining about. You are not even burned. And that's just the fire of this material world, which is nothing. And you ask me to do something that I would have to, for doing this, I would have to tolerate the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the after, the fire of His anger, which cannot be tolerated. So Imam alayhi salam, although he loves his brother, but he set the boundary for his brother and set the boundary for his dear ones. You are my loved ones. And Imam says, "Oh, Akhil, if you want from my own share, I give you whatever you want. But I would not give you any extra share from the public treasury." So the love for his family and someone like Imam Ali with his compassion, you can imagine the kind of love that he has for his family. However, he does not let this love to cloud his judgment, to push him, even if it is for one single coin, one single dinar, dirham to give aqil. Imam doesn't do that. It is the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his obligation that surpass everything. We have in chapter Baqarah, verse 165. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ أَنْدَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. Yet of mankind are some who take unto themselves rivals to Allah, loving them as a love like of Allah. So sometimes they take their children, sometimes they take their wealth, sometimes they take their friends, and they love them as they love Allah. يحبونهم كحب الله. And the verse of one says, that's not what a believer is expected to do. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. What those who believe are more, so they are directing more love towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the others. Their love for Allah is not in the same level to their love for the family, for the others. Let alone to say that their love for the others would push them to go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Unfortunately, there are many cases in today's society, unfortunately, in Muslim communities, we see that happens. In non-Muslim community, we see that happens. That when someone, for example, gets to power, social power, social position, and then there are expectations coming from the close ones, the ones who help the guy to get the position during the election, so on and so forth, from their families, from their children. And unfortunately, not many are very careful in making sure that no one take advantage of this kind of situation. No child, no friend can take advantage to their own benefit. And that's what's make a muttaqi separate. That's something that many people, they don't like it. So if you don't, for example, the one who gets to power doesn't give enough to the one who supported him during election, next time they won't support him. So those friends may get upset, may leave him. But that's the point. Where our love is and what is our priority. So you see in the case of Talha and Zubayr, they were close companions of Ali alayhi salam. What happened that they joined a war against Ali? Because they had expectations that Ali did not fulfill. Ali did not let his love for his friends and his close companions to cloud his judgment and his justice. And that's a teaching, that's a beautiful teaching that we have to learn from the school of Ahlul Bayt. And the last characteristic to discuss in this session is Imam alayhi salam saying about muttaqin, يَعْتَرِفُ بِالْحَقِّ قَبْلَ أَنْ يُشْهَدَ عَلَيْهِ. A muttaqi, a pious person, is someone who admits truth before there is a need, before someone brings testimony against him. In other words, Imam wants to say, muttaqin are, and pious people are the ones who have an internal court within themselves. If they make a mistake, if they make something wrong, they are not waiting for the others to find proofs against them. They are the ones that they are sincere, making a mistake, admitting it, asking for forgiveness, and trying their best to compensate for it. That's his sincerity, his truth seeking attribute and personality is what Imam alayhi salam says is among the attributes that distinguish a pious person. That's distinguish a muttaqi. You see in the verse of Quran, chapter Nisa, verse 135. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين. Oh, believers, maintain justice and give testimony for the sake of Allah, even if that is against yourself. So be the judge for yourself. Be the judge against your own interest. If you see something is wrong, admit it, even if it is may cost you financially, may cost you your reputation, but you know that is the right thing to do. And a true believer and a pious person is the one who tolerate the cost to defend truth, to stand by truth, and to not let his soul to go astray. وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوِ الْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ. So this sincerity, even if again it goes against one's own interest, against one's own family, against one's own friends, parents, to maintain this characteristic amongst us, that's one of the attributes of muttaqin. So in other words, muttaqin are to trusted people, because if, for example, you are heading, for example, an institute, you are, for example, working in a workplace, and you have among your friends a pious person that you know that he does not lie, a pious person that you know that he is not the one who blame others for his mistakes. You know that if something goes wrong, he is the one coming to you, letting you know before you have to investigate into it. That makes trust. That's one of the reasons that pious people are the trusted people, because people gradually they learn, they become certain that if something is wrong, I don't have to be worried about these people. They are the ones letting me know. They are trusted people. So this matter is not only about being moderate, it's about being trusted within the community. So to wrap up my discussion tonight, so Imam alayhi salam mentions 3 attributes about muttaqin, which is about their just attitude, just nature, the way that they maintain moderation in against others. So if it is against their enemies of Allah, enemies of faith, enemies of communities, someone who intend to hurt them, they are the ones who not let their personal grudge, their anger, to push them to do something that is beyond the justice. They don't take any excessive method and step here. And their love for someone, on the other hand, doesn't tempt them, doesn't push them towards violating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's obligations. Again, they love their dear ones. However, that kind of love for human being, that kind of love for Allah's creature comes after the love for the Lord and for the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the last but not least is that the muttaqins are the ones that they have the sincerity, they have that intuition, they have that inside voice which guides them, which judges them, which helps them, which makes them to be truth seekers. They admit their mistakes without a need for investigations, without a need for a court, without a need for other people to look for proofs. These are the people that can be trusted. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the blessing to be among true muttaqin, among true pious people, and to inshallah be able to maintain these characteristics that Imam alayhi salam mentions for true followers of the school of Ahlul Bayt. Please recite the salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Ajal Faraja.